what do you think happens next? What, like,
Yeah, I think a perfect scenario here is the Maduro regime falls, somebody moderate takes over, and they're friendly with the United States. That'd be huge. That'd be a major Trump victory, a major win for the United States, and for a
mhm.
lot of the people in Venezuela, no doubt. We're not there. It seems like Maduro still has a pretty tight grip on power. What we're seeing just right now is Venezuela.
Okay, so I have a treat for you today. Preston Stewart has graciously decided that he would be willing to join me here. He has quite a schedule trying to keep up with what he's doing, and I asked him to join me because I want to talk about Venezuela. So, Preston, welcome. Thank you for being willing to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. Looking forward to the conversation here.
So what I want to do is focus, like he focuses on Ukraine and Russia and all the other major conflicts that are when they pop up. But he's been somebody that's been tracking Venezuela. I did one video on Venezuela. He's been like keeping tabs on this. In fact, since we started trying to coordinate this, it popped off yet again. There was another hit. So we're going to talk about Venezuela. So set the stage for me. Tell us what is going on. Why is the U.S. so focused on Venezuela? Recently, like there's been focus on Venezuela politically for the last couple of decades, and that makes sense. Capturing the or you know what Maduro's predecessor did in nationalizing the oil fields and then running their country into the ground and then saber rattling with the U.S. I get that politically, but it's turning hot here. So what's going on?
So I don't know. I think it's going to be hard to pinpoint an exact reason for the timing of this, but something has changed in the last few months now. We had the Attorney General Pam Bondi come out and say that Maduro's the bounty for any information leading to his arrest was increased from I think 10 to 50 million dollars. So all of a sudden that's on the radar. We're taking Venezuela more seriously. Tren de Aragua, a cartel out of Venezuela, was listed as a foreign terror organization. So we started to see a shift towards we're actually going to do something about this. We're going to prioritize Venezuela. There wasn't necessarily any event that led to that. It's been a long time coming, I think. So we've been heading in that direction. We could argue maybe that the July election in 2024, when Maduro just kind of outright stole it, was maybe the last tipping point.
Hmm.
But, there was not like a event 2 months ago where all of a sudden, bam, now we're prioritizing Venezuela. I think generally it fits with this administration's focus on more things in
Yeah.
our hemisphere, more closer to home. Um, and anyways, we saw a pretty significant deployment of military assets to the Caribbean. I think it's the largest in our history.
Yeah.
We've got four guided missile destroyers, a submarine, countless aircraft, now 10 F-35s assisting in counter narcotics operations, submarines off the coast in the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group. About, I want to say it's like 1,800 or so that could be used for ground op for amphibious operations.
Yeah, I
And
showed that little section of one of your videos where you're showing like these ships are coming from here and from over here, and it's this one and that one and the other one. I showed that little clip in the one video that I made about Venezuela before,
it's a
and
lot.
it's a lot. Like you're like you're seeing a pretty massive force. So does it strike you that this is all for interdicting drug trafficking? Because that seems like heavy-handed for if that's what your goal is.
A big problem we have right now, personal opinion, is I don't think there's a coherent message as to what exactly we're trying to do. So I
Yep.
mentioned the Maduro bounty. That kind of hints at something like regime change. We don't like Maduro, which is nothing new there. But anytime regime change is brought up, it's kind of brushed aside by anyone in the administration. Then we have the drug angle. Well, this is protecting American cities from drugs being brought in. Well, Venezuela brings a little bit in. That's not really my area of expertise, but that's not the primary route for drugs into the United States. But that seems to be the focus recently is assisting the Coast Guard in trying to interdict these vessels. It's a big step up, but it's also not completely out of the blue. I mean, we've seen the U.S. Navy assist the Coast Guard countless times in previous operations. It's nothing new that the Coast Guard doesn't have the personnel or the resources to shut down the entire Gulf from any illicit activity. They just don't, they can't do it. So supplementing them with the Navy is not crazy. Four guided missile destroyers is, if it's going all in,
Yeah.
that's the challenge right now is, well, what are we trying to do? Because depending on the
Right.
mission set, it's either a lot or it's right in line. I think there's a big part of this that is just straight messaging to Maduro. kind of flexing in our hemisphere.
Uh-huh. And in
I
our
think that
hemisphere has been a big change. Like you've seen the potential doctrinal change from focusing all in on China, which is what's hurting the Ukraine effort, because okay, we can't really be involved in NATO and Europe because we're so solely focused on China. To now, wait, maybe we're not going to focus on China anymore and just focus on our own hemisphere. Comment on that a little bit. Like, what do you make of that?
that's a little frustrating for me because I think there is a very rational argument to be made that over the course of the last few years we should have been maybe prioritizing China over Russia, Ukraine, but we never did that. We never really made that move, and I thought that that's where maybe the administration would go, and we haven't done it.
Yeah,
So now
it
I'm
would have
wondering
been
if all
one
of that talk
thing.
was just talk.
Yeah, it would have been understandable had you done that, and that. But it's like we didn't prioritize China, we deprioritized Europe, and that's all that we did.
Hmm.
If that makes sense, I mean that's all that we did. And now
Yeah.
it looks like we're going to deprioritize China too, and just focus on our own hemisphere and let whatever goes on over there fester. And that's a recipe for, you know, a decade later being involved in something much bigger because you just let it go. So anyway,
I think
that's
we
just.
can't. I, I think we have to be more cognizant of politics in this regard than maybe we are with issues with China or Russia and Ukraine. And I try to stay as nonpartisan as possible, but of course, these are political subjects. The messaging around this for President Trump is very positive. He's going after drug cartels. Or that's the messaging that these are bad people doing bad things to American citizens right off our shore. The messaging there is much simpler. I think it's much better received, especially when at least some in his camp campaigned on no more foreign wars. We can't send our sons and daughters overseas to die in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, or this was never really in the cards, but Ukraine is one of the arguments.
Mhm.
Why get involved over there when we've got these drugs on our southern border? So I think in a political sense, it's been very positive so far for President Trump.
And if he gets involved, he wants to get involved in a limited strike where he can run a victory lap rather than boots on the ground and let's go take out. So I'm not sure that there's anything about actually capturing Maduro or regime change or that sort of thing just because he doesn't want to embroil himself. He wants to maybe lob a missile at something and be done with it. That's my read of the situation. And if you really wanted to go after the core of where drugs are coming from, Venezuela doesn't seem like the place, as you were alluding to earlier. Maybe maybe Colombia next door would be a more rational pick, given how much cocaine comes from there. But at any rate, yeah, it seems weird. Now, one of the things that's interesting to my mind is the messaging, as you were talking about. We haven't really gotten our messaging straight. Remember how the Republicans, and I'm a Republican, Republicans were chastising Joe Biden for tell us what you really want to do with Ukraine. I don't think Trump has done this with really well with Colombia. He just kind of let actions speak for him. And the actions that are speaking, you brought this up on Wednesday's video, you where you were talking about like are we really, do we have a legal basis here? Talk more to that end of like, what are we doing? Like, tell me about the hit. So, because the audience might not be aware of it,
Mhm.
this is a second or third hit. We don't know. I think third. Uh,
Yeah.
and, and what legal basis we actually have. I'll let you speak to that because you were already speaking to that.
Yeah. I think this is a really important conversation that we need to have as Americans. And I am guilty of maybe not pushing it as hard as I should have throughout the course of the global war on terror. Only recently left the military, so maybe that was a part of not wanting to get out over my skis. But we have for the last 20 plus years kind of I think a lot of people would say given the president a lot of authority to carry out lethal action abroad. And at the very least, I think we probably just should talk about that again and make sure that's really what we want. Either way, that's the way things are right now. We've seen a lot of comparison of striking the cartels to the global war on terror because just, last week or the week prior, we killed some Islamic State guys in Africa. We're carrying out strikes in, Yemen, Syria, you name it, right? Every day you wake up, or not, maybe not every day, but there's pretty consistent US strikes happening around the world. So the look is, and what people are saying is, how can we carry out attacks against cartel against terrorists abroad, but not cartel members off our coast? And the issue there is that there's not a clear legal justification for doing so. The strikes abroad tied to the September 11th attacks. We went to the United Nations. The UN Security Council said that we had the authority to act in self-defense. We then had Congress put forward and the president signed the 2001 authorization for the use of military force.
Mhm.
Whether we think that is or was a good thing is a totally different conversation. That covers the transnational terrorism tied to September 11th.
Mhm.
There's arguments as to whether or not the cartels should even be listed as terrorist organizations. It's a bit of a stretch already, but even if we do that, designating a group an FTO, a foreign terror organization, opens up legal avenues we can take, financial
Mhm.
avenues we can take. It does not it does not automatically mean that those people are viable targets for military strikes. So we have
What are
not
the
really seen
Go ahead.
well, we just haven't seen a legal justification yet. What we've largely seen, understand we have to understand that we don't have all the information. But the case made so far has largely been emotional. Who's going to
Yeah.
stand up for traffickers? These are bad people. Do you really want to be on the side of cartels? And nobody wants to do that. But that's not really the basis for the legality of carrying out lethal action, is bad people.
So when I think of drug trafficking, I don't think terrorists. What are the legal, uh, the pros and cons of calling them that? Like what? Like it, the con, I think, is that you're reclassifying something that is never was considered that. The pro is that you get all that, but help me understand here. If you reclassify them, what's the downside of reclassifying? Because it seems like they're a square trying to fit into a round hole.
I think the downside would be that we probably need to put some limits on who we call foreign terror organizations, or it's going to lose its meaning. And at some
Hmm.
point, that might come back to bite us. In a positive sense, I think it does a lot of great things in trying to deal with cartels, in the sense that we might be able to seize some of their assets, shut them off, certain individuals tied to the cartel, shut them off from the international monetary system, international banking, restrict their travel. We can hold them at times in ways that you would not be able to if they were American citizens or a crime was committed here in the United States. A good way to think about it is when we were going after Al Qaeda in, say, Pakistan or Afghanistan or anywhere, any one of their cells around the world, you can look at somebody who facilitated Al Qaeda operations and go after them, not lethal. Let's remove the lethal aspect, but you
Hmm.
can go after that person and find out, okay, let's put surveillance on them, understand their financial transactions, where's this money coming from? Because they're a designated FTO, we have the full weight of the US government looking into that stuff. When it's transnational crime, we just don't have the same resources. So it
Hmm.
does open up some new capabilities that, again, I imagine most people watching this are going to say, yeah, cartels are bad, and I'm there with you.
Right,
So in
right.
that sense, it's good. It's just, are we using the terminology maybe a little too loosely? Maybe we need to come up with
Yeah,
another method.
that's quite possible. It seems. I don't know enough about it, but it seems like that's possible. Tell me about the strikes. Like, so the
Yeah, yeah.
strikes are hitting, and we're like, okay, we hear that you said that this is what it is, but do we have proof that that's what it is, or are we just taking the word of the government, or what?
This adds some murkiness to it. So the United States has released two videos showing strikes against what appear to be go fast boats. These are
Hmm.
boats with multiple engines, very pretty large, all things considered, used to generally move drugs from one location to another without being detected. Uh, these are in wide use by cartels all across the Caribbean, so it's nothing new there. We've seen the videos of two of those being destroyed. President Trump said that there have been three strikes, and we're tracking 14 people that the US government has said have been eliminated. And there's questions to that because these are boats trying to move product. 11
Hmm.
people is too many. Now, generally, they'll go a long distance. You might have two or three in the boat and you swap out pilots while people sleep because you go nonstop. And that's part of you can rotate through the engines and just go, 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 go because you're trying to move illicit products without being detected. 11 people doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So that's raised some questions. But even split across three boats, then those are pretty heavily loaded. There's no indication that at any point were U.S. forces under fire. So that removes the self defense question here.
Hmm.
And the Maduro regime has, in one case, said these were just villagers. They had no connections to cartels. They're going to say that. If they're going to say anything, they're going to say that. So take that with a big grain of salt. But we really have not seen any additional evidence. The evidence at this point, and I think we have to be honest with ourselves. If another government said this, we would say no.
Show us
Is
the proof at least, right? I mean, I
the
mean, I
evidence at
think
this
it's
point is
fair to
trust us?
say
Yeah,
that we should see some proof. We haven't seen the argument and we haven't seen the proof, and it's not. I'm not like just a skeptic. I'm just saying, just put it out there. Let's let's just see what's going on because this is going to potentially matter.
agreed. Yeah. And again, I think it's important to note we're seeing people come out and say this is blatantly illegal, and others say this is clearly legal. And I think it's worth mentioning that there's, of course, a lot of information that we don't have here. The government is saying we know exactly where they came from, the ports they came from. And we probably were watching them load up some sort of product. Like that wouldn't be surprising in the least. We probably have the intel to track the product from the facility all the way to the boat and then struck these guys out in the ocean. We have the ability to do that, and we shouldn't expect all of that to be made public. But we're pretty far in the other direction right now of they were positively identified. Let's move on.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Okay, so when we were looking at Israel and Iran about to pop off, like the day that it happened, I put out a video saying, "Hey, I think something's going to happen in the next 2 days," and then I went to class, and it happened while I was at class. Right? I mean, it was like you could see the signs if
Inconsiderate.
you know
Yeah.
what you're looking for. Right? You're seeing the signs in the Caribbean, the buildup, all that kind of thing. So, and then things started happening. Okay, what do you think happens next? Well, like as a final kind of thing, like how vulnerable is Venezuela's military? Do you think it'll come to a military blow? Do you think it'll just be what? All I think that is going to happen is that Trump wants to hit some things, take some credit, and move on. But I could be wrong. What are you seeing here? And we'll end with that.
Yeah, I think a perfect scenario here is the Maduro regime falls, somebody moderate takes over, and they're friendly with the United States. That'd be huge. That'd be a major Trump victory, a major win for the United States, and for a
Hmm.
lot of the people in Venezuela, no doubt. We're not there. It seems like Maduro still has a pretty tight grip on power. What we're seeing just right now is Venezuela is mobilizing for a military exercise. Make sure I get the name correct here. Uh, Sovereign Caribbean,
Hmm.
and they're moving out to a nearby island, disembarking tanks, surface air missile systems, aircraft. Talking about enforcing electron or putting into place electronic warfare mechanisms off their coastline. So we're seeing both sides kind of posture closer and closer to one another, which is never a good thing because that's where a mistake can happen. My gut says we're going to see some increased U.S. military strikes against clear cartel facilities inside of Venezuela. That'll
Okay.
be the next step.
So, over time, do you think it'll escalate to a hot war militarily? And does Venezuela even have much of a military? Like, that's not something I'm aware of. It seems like they don't
Yeah.
tend to spend time keeping up good best practices for their military. They're focused on other things.
Yeah, if you look at a pure military to military, it wouldn't be a very fair fight. It would
Yeah.
likely be over very quickly without like, knock on wood, zero US casualties type discrepancy in the militaries here. But that's not to say they're without capabilities. There has been some indication they've been getting their hands on those Shahhead style drones, which we
Yeah.
know can be a headache. And just defeating the military, I think, leaves open the big question of, if Maduro's gone, that doesn't necessarily make Venezuela better. And
Hmm.
I think that's one of the
That's fair.
concerns here. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Uh, I know I said that was the last question, but I still have a follow up here with.
let's do it.
So you just said Shaheds. How chummy are Maduro and his administration with the Russians? It seems like they're pretty tight. I mean, they backed his play, I think, when he was claiming victory and chasing out his opponent a year ago. So, is there a really solid connection there, from what you understand?
Yeah, it's they're in that group. So they've got buddies in Russia and Moscow, they got buddies in Tehran, they've got buddies in Beijing. So their alliances are pretty diametrically opposed to those of the United States. I would view this very similar to the situation in Syria, where there might be a connection there with Russia, but Russia's got their hands full right now. And I don't think there's any realistic way that Russia contributes in a meaningful way here. If anything, China. I think all of those
Huh.
parties would like to see Maduro stay in power. Um, but if you're looking at those different groups, I do think it'd be very surprising to see China all of a sudden provide some sort of military capabilities or direct assistance. It might just be that we upset China, and that might affect some trade deals or diplomatic situations there.
All right. Well, if folks, if you're not familiar with Preston Stewart's channel, it's at Preston PrestonStewart on YouTube. Check out his channel. He's a wealth of information, covering much of the same kind of geopolitical conflicts, but he casts a wider net than I do. So, Preston, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for the invitation, sir.